Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Todd Metcalf. PwC's Governance Insights Center recently released a report on trends shaping corporate governance in 2024. To discuss these trends and what they mean for corporate boards is Paul DeNicola, a principal in PwC's Governance Insights Center. Paul, welcome.
Thanks a lot for having me, Todd.
So, Paul, the new report discusses 5 trends that boards need to be watching in 2024. Could you talk about each of these trends at a very high level to familiarize us with them and possibly how you're seeing boards respond to those trends?
Sure. Boards certainly have a lot on their hands in 2024. Let me give you the top 5. The first in my mind is the geopolitical environment right now. We expect that environment will continue to be unstable throughout the year and create ongoing uncertainty for companies and in the boardroom. Obviously, we have the war in Ukraine, we have the events in Israel and Gaza lingering with violence flaring around the globe. So against that backdrop of uncertainty, boards are really going to have to look at where the company's strategy is right now and where it needs to be going. Second is around the topic of ESG and what I would call the rising prominence of ESG economics. Over the last 2 or 3 years, many companies and boards have been looking at the topic of ESG very much from a compliance perspective. And I think that's changing. And while the acronym ESG may have become a target for certain activists and political office holders, business leaders and board members certainly can't deny the fact that issues like climate, human capital, these affect supply chains, customer bases, and the availability of materials. So we see boards really beginning to shift their thinking from a purely regulatory focus to one that is more focused on the economic impact and the bottom line impact of ESG investments and the company's ESG initiatives. Third, I'd say, is the increasing shareholder activism environment. And while the headlines around shareholder activism may be a little less frequent and may be smaller, all of the data shows that shareholder activists are initiating actions at companies and at boards at pre-COVID levels. Insert into this relatively new rules around universal proxy, which create general uncertainty for boards while giving activists opportunities for leverage. All of our data shows that activists can, in fact, win a fair number of concessions by approaching the board in this manner. So boards really have to go to that pre-universal proxy playbook, and then they need to refresh that. Fourth is around risk oversight, and it's what in the paper we call fortifying the integration of strategy and risk governance. So companies and boards face a number of different discrete risks, from generative AI to the geopolitical risks we talked about, to climate, to a number of others. And the question is really around, how do you think about all of those risks, both individually and in the aggregate, and what is your approach at the board level for effective full board and committee oversight over all of those discrete risks? Finally, there is, I think, a greater focus on board culture as one of the key trends of 2024. And that is, what is it like when you put a group of 8 or 10 or 12 high-achieving individuals in a room together and asking them to make very difficult decisions from an oversight perspective about the direction of a company? There is a dynamics to the room. There is a psychology of the boardroom. And I think that one of the trends we're seeing is boards are really starting to look at what those dynamics are like and what board behaviors they really want to focus on. And how do you do that? I think you can do that through 2 ways. One is through greater education of the board, and that is boards being more proactive about what form of director education they're pursuing. And second, it's through their self-assessment process. Boards can approach their self-assessment process in lots of different ways, but more and more we're seeing boards take an approach where they're doing individual surveys of the board and the committees, but in addition, they're having interviews and conversations with each member of the board and the members of management that interact with the board in trying to get more information around board culture and board dynamics.
So speaking of that, according to our corporate director survey, 45% of directors believe that someone on their board should be replaced, yet 39% indicate such changes have not occurred since that last board assessment that you referenced. So why is it that directors who are critical of their peers and think at least one director on their board should be replaced are not using the board assessment process to make changes to the board?
It's a tough one. We've asked this question in our annual corporate director survey for over 12 years, and this number has not budged. It hasn't moved. We've always been, about half of board members think one of their fellow board members is underperforming. In fact, 1 out of 5 think 2 or more of their fellow directors are underperforming. There are really, when you think about board refreshment, there are really 2 ways in which that happens. One is a more defined way, and that is to have policies around board refreshment, like mandatory retirement ages or term limits. And the other, as you mentioned, is to use the board assessment process in a robust way. My view is that simply taking a survey approach to board assessments is not always the most effective approach. I do think spending the additional time, whether that's having the board chair or lead director or chair of the Nom/Gov committee conduct individual interviews, or having a third-party facilitator conduct those interviews, are really a way to get more information about the performance of board members, to give them feedback to potentially be better in addressing the issue of board refreshment when there's an underperforming director.
Well, another interesting fact from the corporate director survey, fully 82% of those polled believe that diversity enhances board performance. But 55% say board diversity efforts are driven mostly by political correctness. So why do you think the nearly 40% of directors who see the value in board diversity, why do they feel that the issue is driven more by politics than other considerations?
I would step back 1 second and just think about it also from the point of view, and this is a perspective I've heard before from many directors, is that there is a view that forces external to the board over the last several years are having an additional impact of what the composition of the board looks like. And whether that is from the perspective of regulators, whether it's from the point of view of shareholders or other stakeholders, that those who are not necessarily members of the board are driving board composition. So I'd say that that data point on political correctness is part of an overall trend where directors are trying to grapple with what should optimal board composition be, what are the attributes and skills that the board really needs at this point in time and over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, and what's the best way to get there, and what are the drivers of that? Is it shareholders? Is it regulators? Is it others?
Thank you, Paul, for joining us. Thank you for your insights into the issues that boards are facing in corporate governance in 2024.
Anytime. Look forward to doing it again soon.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.